funny. You should know that we're not perfect. We're human, we're flawed. Just say to some grace for the sake of us all.
Hello, Vax Choice and Clout Hub community. Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of In the Lion's Den, hosted by Dr. Bill Lionberger. How are you doing today, Dr. Bill?
I'm doing great, Melissa. Excited for today's show.
Yes, me too. This has been something that's been in the back of my mind. I hate to say it, for probably about 2 years. Well, really since the open border, I guess, since Biden came and took in. So I'm excited. We have a new guest today. If people aren't familiar, his name is John Guandolo. He is a former FBI special agent and U.S. Marine Corps veteran. He specializes in counterterrorism. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He served in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm before joining the FBI in 1996. An author of Raising a Jihadi Generation, offering controversial insights into national security. So I'm excited to hear him share some of his knowledge on these topics and hopefully not scare us too bad, right?
Well, you know, the truth will set you free. So we've got to have the truth, and we've got to have our head on a swivel and know what we really have in our backyard, in our communities, in our states. If it wasn't bad enough before, because we've had different cells and different terrorist organizations that have assembled in our country, then when you have an open border for so many years where their focus in every possible way was to drive as many illegals into our country as they possibly could, in such an open way without proper vetting, we've made the problem even worse. So it's really a big job for our ICE and Tom Homan and the rest of the team to go out there and take down these potential terrorist threats and others as we try to make our country safer. So
while at the same time it's hard to make sure we're not being racist or assuming everyone who says their Islam is bad or whatever, or anything like that. But I'm very interested to hear what we've allowed into our country and what they might have planned. So I'm going to be in the background enjoying the show, Dr. Bill, and I'll be back at the end for questions.
Excellent. So to my open, today's show title, The Enemy Within, America's Battlefield. At the heart of our great nation lies a promise of liberty, equality, and opportunity for all. Yet as we turn the spotlight inward, we find the enemies from around the world, including China, Russia, and the carefully planned and executed Islamic movement, which continues working to destroy our country from within, with doctrine and terrorist activities against all aspects of the American way of life. These enemies have woven themselves into our teaching institutions, federal, state, and local government institutions, seeking to undermine and destroy the very fabric of our society. They touch every aspect of our lives, from the erosion of civil liberties and the polarization of identity politics to the shroud of misinformation, which has led to an unchecked rise of power and politicized governmental monopolies. Our challenge is to identify these forces, the real threats to our nation's sovereignty, and the intricate methods by which they have infiltrated our country, then work to destroy them one by one. The very bedrock of our republic is under siege, and it falls upon us to rise with unwavering resolve against the focus and forces that seek to dismantle our freedoms. And with that, I would like to welcome our esteemed guest, John Guandolo.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Great to be on with you.
Hey, John. It's good to have you on. It's so timely to be here and be discussing the topics that we're going to get into today. You are an expert in these areas. You've worked in the FBI as a special agent. You've been a special consultant. You have an amazing CV, written books. And, there's so much noise out there with all of the Doge and everything else that's going on with this new administration. But behind the scenes, we still have this dangerous, insidious threat, right?
We do. And I think you've just set it up very well. I think the place to maybe for me to begin is to remind your audience that we are in a war, that we have in the United States organizations and movements, capital M movements, the communist movement, the Islamic movement, that are being directed and funded in large part and doing coordination with hostile foreign powers that are using these proxies, these US-based organizations and movements to destroy the United States. That's called a war.
Yeah.
And we're at war. And the reminder is not just that we're at war. I hope your audience already gets that, but that wars are not won by changing policies and fixing issues. So, for instance, a lot of what's going on right now, in my professional opinion, is very positive, right? Regaining our borders, shutting down immigration, getting rid of people who are here illegally, upending the financial situation where we are literally $34 trillion in debt. All these things the administration is doing, in my opinion, a lot of these things are very positive. But wars are not won by fixing issues and changing policies. They're won by identifying and vanquishing the enemy, which is something that has not been done at all. Going back to the early 90s, we've not done it. We've not looked at this war from the perspective of the enemy, who they are, why they're fighting, and then vanquishing them. And that's why we're literally getting our butts handed to us and we're losing. We're on the verge of completely losing. Yet the perspective many Americans have is that things are getting better. Things are not getting better. Some issues are being fixed and some pieces of what's going on are improving. But from a war perspective, they're not getting better.
Well, I think that you have to start, first of all, if you've got an administration that is all on the side of funding terrorism and all of its proxies and all the parts and pieces that are against our country, I think, you can't start till you get that done. And I think we've come full circle with the new administration. I wanted to play clip one, if you would, Melissa, and just as a setup, because it began to set the framework in preparing for winning the election. And obviously there's a lot that they're handling, but this was one of the talking points that President Trump had.
Today we honor all of the brave American and Indian military service members who work together to safeguard our freedom. We stand proudly in defense of liberty, and we are committed to protecting innocent civilians from the threat of radical Islamic terrorism.
I think that it was part of the talking points, where we're at in that fight. I mean, what are we, only less than 60 days in with this administration, maybe? Holding the new administration's feet to the fire in terms of that commitment, I think is important. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree. And I want to just comment on something you said right before the clip, which I agree with. I want to make it clear to your audience. I think the things that this administration are doing are vital to reestablishing the republic, which has to be done. But the war can't be won unless you actually understand how the enemy is doing what they're doing and going after it. So I do know that from probably some people that if they're not familiar with my work, they might look at it and be like, well, he's a little critical of Mr. Trump when it's less than 2 full months since he's, gotten into office. And I think that might be a fair assessment, except I've been doing this longer than anyone in the country. I've been doing this since just shortly after 9/11, as far as identifying these networks, training people first in the government. I mean, I created the first training program in the government on the things we're discussing right now. So people people inside at the FBI, CIA, DIA, NSA, state and local investigative and law enforcement authorities, which were all part of that first training program in August 2006, would understand that it's not merely about the people doing violence, like the guy plowing his vehicle into a crowd of people in the French Quarter in New Orleans, for instance, or somebody going to the military gate on a naval base, the Naval Air Station Corpus Christi, or guys blowing up bombs at the Boston Marathon, or somebody going into a nightclub in Orlando, or people killing people in San Bernardino. These are all jihadis. They're acts of jihad. They are absolutely in accordance with Islamic law, normative and universally taught Islamic law. And until you understand how they're doing what they're doing, how they use the violent part of what they do, measured against the much larger non-violent part that is being executed by suit-wearing jihadis, many of whom are pretending to be conservative Republicans, and then getting their way into, for instance, the Trump camp, then while we're helping get rid of the jihadis who are shooting guns overseas, we're actually empowering them here in the United States. That's what I'm talking about, is understanding how they're fighting the war in the totality of it, because we can't, their whole way of waging war is designed so when we think we are having victories, they're actually advancing their cause here in the United States. That's what I'm talking about. That's why it's important to actually understand their doctrine, their published strategies, and their modus operandi, and the massive jihadi support network here in the United States.
It seems like when you mention massive support network, I mean, in my open, from what I understand, they've infiltrated the colleges so that they're creating this whole against U.S. movement, which we see and we saw all last year. And we continue to see now there's pushback and fight back. Now, all of a sudden, these colleges are being told, you support that, your money's going away. Now, all of a sudden, they're changing their tune, right? It's a start. It's a good start.
It's a good start. You are correct. And 100% agree with that. The issue comes with, again, looking at the people that are participating in violent protests, and then looking at people that are calm, speaking to you in pleasant tones, wearing suits, who are actually part of the same effort. And they use the one to advance the other. So maybe if I take a couple minutes and explain this from a military perspective. I mean, I got recruited out of the FBI at the end of 2002 by the Department of Defense, by the guy, Rich Higgins, who became the director of strategic planning for the National Security Council. And he recruited me and Steve Coughlin out of the Department of Defense. He was working for General Pace, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and put us together at the end of 2008. We had been working together for a few years prior to that. And our goal was to do strategic analysis of the threat. And we were the first people inside the government to brief senior leaders about how the enemy actually is and was doing what they're doing. This, what I'm talking about, this splinter operation, that's what this is called. And I'll just walk it out a few steps so everyone understands how important this is to understand this. The suit-wearing jihadis from prominent Islamic organizations like the Islamic Society of North America, or the Council on American Islamic Relations, or the Muslim Public Affairs Council, or the Muslim American Society, after 9/11, and in the several years after that, let's say to 2008-9, even beyond that, they point to Al-Qaeda and then later others like the Taliban, ISIS, etc. And they say, those guys are bad. So talk to us and we'll help you understand, how to develop foreign policy, counterterrorism strategies. And that's what the U.S. government did under Bush and then under Mr. Obama and going forward. Yet all of those groups I just named are easily identifiable as organizations that are Muslim Brotherhood organizations that operate in the United States. And evidence from the largest terrorism financing trial in American history, which, by the way, was adjudicated near where I live, because I'm in Dallas. the U.S. versus the Holy Land Foundation trial, reveals these organizations are Muslim Brotherhood organizations, and that in the case of CARE, that's a Hamas organization. And so as Americans and others started to realize this, well, now you had to do another step, another splinter away from them. And so you get the, quote, moderate Muslims, the Zuhdi Jassers, the Raheel Razas, the Kanta Ahmeds that go on CNN and Fox. And they start to parse things and say, well, there's Sharia and there's Sharia law, or there's Islam or there's Islamism, or there's, jihad and militant jihad, which is all a lie. None of these things are recognized in Islamic law. Islamic law defines jihad as warfare against non-Muslims. There's no such thing as Islamism or a lone wolf in Islamic law. So these people are now the moderates. And then you splinter away from that. And then you get these new conservative Republican Muslims, which they tried, by the way, back in 2006, 7, 8. And I was the one who exposed them, a group in Colorado that painted themselves red, white, and blue. And it was a mother and 2 sons and a daughter. And they actually got traction. But we were able to educate people that these are jihadis, no less, lying. And of course, after they got exposed, they showed their true colors. This is what happens. And so now they're presenting themselves in the form of conservative Republicans. One was just running for the Republican chair of Cobb County, Georgia. And I got calls from them and provided them factual information, which they put out to the public, and she lost. I mean, for God's sakes, her name's Sophia Farouk. She was the granddaughter of one of the most prominent Muslim Brotherhood Islamic jurists of the 20th century that formed the Islamic movement, Jamaat-e-Islami. These are just things that citizens aren't keeping up with, and just pointing these things out. And this is why it's important. And here, Bill, why it's important right here, right now, is because this is much more, what I'm describing, much more a counterintelligence and espionage matter than it is merely a, quote, terrorism matter. And these are things that within the U.S. government right now, and I would argue for the last 15 to 20 years, there has been no functional counterintelligence apparatus in the United States. So when people wonder, how is it that Mr. Trump invited a Hezbollah operative to his inauguration in the form of Imam Husseini, whose background was easy to figure out? And I got a call on that, and I gave the information to the administration, and I was told that, I can't use the language, but that they literally about fell over when they realized the mistake. And you calling it a mistake, I think it was an intentional placement of a Hezbollah guy at the Trump inauguration. The question is, who did it? Who's responsible? And why aren't they fired? And then we see things like the naming of a U.S. ambassador to Kuwait, jihadi, the naming of the latest U.S. attorney for Los Angeles, Bill Asaley, whose name, that's not his name, but another jihadi. So this is what it's about. It's about a counterintelligence operation to present a friendly, pro-American face so that they'll be on the inside. And when decisions need to be made, the administration turns to people like that for their opinions. And the opinions will go in the direction of our adversaries. That's how this works. And that's why it's so effective. But this is why really understanding the Islamic doctrine, their published strategies, how they do what they do, their modus operandi, and the Islamic network. And I'll say just one more thing about this network. I just put it out today on Twitter. I've been putting this out for 14 years. $1,000 cash reward if you can name one national Islamic organization that's not hostile. How's that for direct and to the point? You can't. You cannot. They don't exist. And so long as the State Department, the Treasury Department, the national security staffs, and others, FBI, CIA, rely 4-star generals rely on these organizations to train their people, we will lose this war.
Yeah. I mean, what you lay out is an amazing piece for people to understand, because the bigger operation is not necessarily what you see briefly for the 5 seconds of news. I'm going to play clip 2, which is pretty much what people see, and I want to contrast that with what you've just talked about. If you would, Melissa, play clip 2, and then we'll come back. I'm going to talk about where the money goes and where it's coming from, and the contrast between the two.
Our top story tonight on Gravitas is about Islamist sleeper terrorists wreaking havoc in America. The 2 devastating New Year's Day attacks in New Orleans and Las Vegas. And a Pennsylvania man now indicted on charges of attempting to support the Hezbollah have reportedly raised concern across America because all 3 served in the U.S. Army. The New Orleans attack on January 1 left 15 dead, 35 injured, when Samsudeen Bahar Jabbar, a 42-year-old man from Texas, drove a pickup truck into a crowd of New Year revelers. He was shot dead at the scene. Authorities later discovered an ISIS flag, weapons, IEDs in his vehicle. Jabbar served in the U.S. Army as a human resource specialist, reportedly, and IT specialist from 2007 until 2015.
I kind of wanted to end with, there he is in military, in a suit, looking like average people or professionals, people that you wouldn't necessarily tie to terrorism as a regular person, right? Well, he doesn't look like a terrorist. These people have blended into society intentionally in ways that people have no idea about. They've infiltrated governments. They've infiltrated, all of the prongs of power. And they also are controlling many of the prongs of power as designed. Then you've got them changing and working on ideologies coming out of school, so people have a whole different idea about, the way things should or are, and so we're under attack, as you say, from all directions, but most especially the ones you don't see, right?
That's exactly right, Bill. I think you just teed it up perfectly, is that here's a guy wearing a suit. Probably if you talk to people before he did this, they'd say, yeah, he's kind of a quiet guy, nice guy, and leave it at that. No idea. People were probably, quote unquote, shocked that he did this. But what he did, first of all, to be clear, is lawful in Islam. It's required when this is an act of no such thing as a lone wolf in Islamic law, Sharia, but there is such a thing as individual jihad. And that's someone who hears the call of jihad, has the ability to do it and agrees with it, and they go out and do it. And we've been seeing that, hundreds and hundreds of acts of individual jihad in the United States since 9/11 in the form of stabbings and shootings and bombings and people using their vehicles. And the point is, when they do it, people are shocked, but the ones who survive, all of a sudden the suit wearing or sweater vest wearing jihadi with clean shaven or a trim beard, all of a sudden grows their beard out because they've exposed themselves as a jihadi. And not understanding these things, not understand that this is what Islam teaches, has been devastating. And just 2 more points, because you mentioned it. If you get copies, which I teach from, of the most widely used textbooks for 12-year-olds, 6th, 7th graders in U.S. Islamic schools, it teaches exactly what ISIS and Al-Qaeda teach. Now, the language is a little softer, but not much. So it says in there, I'll just give you a few examples. It's a book called What Islam is All About, edited by Yahya Emmerich, who's, of course, a Muslim brother. And it says right in the very first page, Islam is not a religion, however, but a complete way of life. And it goes on to explain that complete way of life is a life governed by Sharia. And it later says, quote, the law of the land is the Sharia of Allah. This is for the 12-year-olds. And that the Sharia comes from the Quran and the Sunnah, the example of Muhammad, which it then teaches. It teaches that jihad is one of the 3 duties of all Muslims, and that dying in jihad, becoming a martyr, is the only thing that immediately grants you paradise. And finally, I mean, there's so much in there, we could make a show out of that, but when it talks about the duty of Muslims, it says the duty of the Muslim citizen is to be loyal to the Islamic State. And so when you see that this is what they teach their children, the former director of the CIA, Jim Woolsey, did a project back in, my goodness, 2005, 2006, years ago. And I think it was published in 2007, looking at mosques in the United States funded by Saudi Arabia and all what they were teaching. And what they're teaching aligns with Al-Qaeda. Of course it does, because it's Islam. When you look at the Muslim Brotherhood doctrine, you read their bylaws, it's absolutely consistent with Al-Qaeda. Why? Because it's consistent with Islamic doctrine. There is no version of Islam that doesn't say, and this is the second big point, the purpose of Islam, and the only purpose taught to children in Islamic schools, taught to adults in mosques and Islamic organizations across the globe. The purpose of Islam is to wage war against the non-Muslim community until Sharia, Allah's law, is imposed on every human on earth, period. And when you do that, you create that global Islamic state, a caliphate, and then you have peace under the Islamic definition, because the house of war is eliminated and the entire world lives under the house of peace, the Dar al-Islam, and Sharia is the law of the land. That's it. That's the singular purpose of Islam. Once you understand that, and once you understand that's obligatory for Muslims to lie when the goal is obligatory, and advancing Islam is obligatory, and it is a capital crime in Islam for Muslims to teach other Muslims anything about Islam that's not true. So if you want to learn about Islam, and you've sworn an oath to the Constitution, like a president, a vice president, a national security advisor, an attorney general, an FBI agent, a governor, a police officer, fill in the blank, a mayor, a member of Congress, and your understanding comes from a Muslim advising you, that's unprofessional, because their doctrine, which they are admitting they adhere to, requires them to lie to you to advance Islam. So because it's a capital crime in Islam for a Muslim to teach another Muslim anything about Islam that's not true, you have to look at the books that they use to teach each other. And when you do that, when you look at what Islam's all about, or you look at the most widely distributed book of Islamic law in North America, Reliance of the Traveler, the Umdat al-Salik, which is published in Beltsville, Maryland in English, and it says exactly what Al-Qaeda says, and the largest Islamic groups in North America, meaning the ones in America, advise Muslims to get it and use it, then you see that they are lying straight to our faces. And when our leaders get up, like Bill Clinton, like George Bush, like President Obama, and they get up, and not, interestingly, not Mr. Trump, who said before the 2016 election, I think Islam hates us. And if he had stayed with that and understood that and had somebody near him that actually would tell him the truth about it, we might not be in the quandary we're in. But when you get people like Clinton, Mr. Bush, Mr. Obama saying that true Islam is peaceful, I'd say, okay, it's compatible with American law and American founding principles, law of nature, law of God. I would say, show me the version of Islam that teaches that. What mosque on the planet and what text, what Islamic law text ever published in any century says that? And you'll find that the answer is none. And so our leaders, since I would argue early 1990s, have been espousing something that's factually untrue, which is professionally incompetent and unprofessional. And Americans are dead because of that, which is the legal definition of criminal negligence. And I think U.S. leaders and people that are in positions of responsibility should be in jail, just like we put doctors and lawyers in jail for criminal negligence.
I think that, the government is a blunt instrument. It has the ability to be surgical and deal with things, but by and large, it appears lots of times clumsy and as a blunt instrument in all kinds of ways. I wanted to have you take a few minutes. We have all of these organizations that are being funded, and the money's coming from different places, but they say follow the money. Here, these organizations don't exist and can't move around and do the things that they're doing and continuing to grow without funding. What can you offer in that regard?
So it's interesting. So to answer that question, let me take 30 seconds to just broaden what we're up against. So when I use the term the enemy that we're facing, I'm talking about the Islamic movement in the United States, which has been here for over 60 years, the communist movement in the United States, which has been here for over 100 years. Both have doctrine, both have published strategy. They have a very wide network made up of thousands of organizations. And the people collaborating with them and the people financing them. Now, there are other movements and other entities that are coming against the United States. Of course, World Economic Forum, I would argue, is one. The United Nations. I mean, as an instrument, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is the largest voting bloc in the UN, made up of every Muslim nation on earth. So these are coordinated efforts against the United States, but secular humanist movement. I mean, there are a lot of things coming against our constitutional republic, liberty, etc., and the founding principles. Again, the law of nature's God, which is identified in our Declaration as the foundation of our entire law and government. But where the rubber meets the road in the United States, at the local level, those two movements, the communists and jihadis, are working seamlessly. And not just in big cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, in places like Tampa, Wichita, Dallas, places like that. And we see that on the streets in these protests, where you have Hamas and Hezbollah entities, but the easiest one for the purpose of this discussion, Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood organizations. By the way, Hamas is an inherent part of the Muslim Brotherhood, so they are one and the same. So everyone in Hamas is a Muslim brother, but not everyone who's a Muslim brother is necessarily Hamas. It's an inherent part of the Muslim Brotherhood. We see Hamas entities, Muslim Brotherhood entities, Islamic Circle in North America, Islamic Society in North America, Council on American Islamic Relations, Muslim Student Association, Muslim American Society, MGAGE, all these groups working at the ground level with, Democratic Socialists of America, Code Pink, Communist Party USA, Revolutionary Communist Party, all these, groups working together at the local level. That's the communist movement, parts of it, parts of the Islamic movement working together. The funding comes from numerous sources. So there is communist funding from groups like many front groups, a lot of them George Soros funded. You've got international money coming from Chinese communists, coming through Chinese Progressive Association, Asian for Black Lives, working with Black Lives Matter, which is a Chinese communist organization. And for clarity, BLM was formed out of the largest Chinese communist front in the United States, right? Freedom Road Socialist Organization, Liberation Road. They work with Chinese Progressive Association, Asian for Black Lives, and a lot of others, which work directly with the Chinese consulates and Chinese Communist Party officials in the United States, working directly, obviously, under the Communist Party in China. But you've got other overseas communist groups funding these movements. You've got Qatar, you've got Saudi Arabia, you've got Iran funding these things. You have non-communist non-jihadi organizations that fund these movements where the money is either shared or used, but since they're doing these things together, you're essentially funding both. So money from Nike, Disney, when these guys were giving millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter for just one instance. And I'm not just picking on those two. There were many major corporations in America that gave money to these organizations. Why? Because they saw that if we didn't, we might come under attack, which means our employees might be physically threatened. So under threat of coercion, these guys gave tons of monies. Many of them didn't give millions, but they 500,000. I'll tell you what I could do for the good guys for 500,000. That's a lot of money you can use towards all kinds of negative things, which of course they used. So the funding is coming from many different channels, domestically and overseas.
It was very, telling, and I would question it all along. Like, why are these, companies getting involved in funding these organizations? Have they been that captured? But it's an interesting point that you raise, where they basically have been threatened or felt threatened that if they didn't go along, they could potentially come under a bigger threat. So that's really interesting information. Another question I have is, we now have, the MS-13 terrorist organization. We have these designations coming out. We in the U.S. are a breeding ground because of our openness for these organizations, because they get to come in and they get to infiltrate. And we're not, China, and we're not Russia, where they just go take them down, okay, supposedly. But here we're just this open book. If you were to be in charge, aside from some of the people that you may not like who are coming in, that doesn't mean everybody's like that. How would you approach this issue in shutting them down and taking them out? Well, how would you approach it?
So that's a great question. I'm actually very grateful you asked that in the way you asked it. So first of all, we're at war. So when we are at war, legally, that opens up many doors that are not open if you merely look at prosecuting criminal acts. Andrew McCarthy, who is the chief terrorism prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, arguably the largest office prosecuting terrorism matters in the United States, and has been for many years. And he also prosecuted Al-Qaeda's blind sheikh. He said, we can't win this war merely in the courts because it takes too long. The Holy Land Foundation trial, for example, largest terrorism financing trial in American history. It was the largest Islamic charity in America. It was a Hamas organization, Holy Land. They were indicted in November 2001, and they weren't prosecuted till November, meaning convicted, till November 2008. You can't win a war like that. So should we be prosecuting? Absolutely. But we have to deal with this as a war. So who are the main players? What countries are involved? Well, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Qatar, UAE, and we need to look at them from that perspective. China, Venezuela, others on the communist side. We need to look at that. So they're part of the war. What are the major international institutions, banks, and other things that are engaged in this war, batting for the other team? Who are the organizations in the United States operating on the side of the bad guys? Well, I just named a bunch, but I'll say it again. All the prominent Islamic organizations, and I challenge anyone who disagrees, name one. I mean, I have a standing offer. I put it out on Twitter about once every couple of months. I'll get $1,000 cash. Name one national Islamic organization that's not hostile. It's not a part of advancing the Islamic movement. And so that's the first start. Unleash the constitutional ability of the executive branch to wage the war in all ways. Number one, that means you have to create, because we don't have one, a functional counterintelligence apparatus in the United States. You have to, I don't know that the FBI is recoverable. But if you create a mission-built organization, could probably have, a very small number of people whose job it is to destroy the communist movement in the United States, the Islamic movement in the United States, and offer them the constitutional powers to do that because we're in a war. That's the beginning. All angles of prosecutorial effort, of course, designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization and shut that down and go after it from every angle because we understand we're at war. You've got to destroy the communist and Islamic movements. And that means it's got to be done at all levels. The work that I do, I started while I was still in the FBI and then at DOD and then afterwards in the private sector. I've been doing it for 14 years in the private sector or 13 years in the private sector, is training local communities, citizens, and then where they're open, local elected officials, city, county councils, mayors, local police departments and sheriff's offices on how to identify these people, how to do the research, find them and the organizations in your county and flush them out lawfully. Make them unable to operate in your county because that has proven to be most effective. But it would be helpful if at the state level, one governor, two governors, three governors, and some attorney generals actually took action. But so far since 9/11, zero have that have actually been putting their finger on the bad guys. Again, a few have created policies, some legislation that holds them back, but doesn't actually put the finger on the bad guy and crush him.
I think that they got probably a lot of public support because when they designated MS-13 and they were able to show the videos and lay the foundation that these bad guys need to go, much less public pushback, except for the Democratic side that doesn't care about any of our citizens and basically wants to push back against everything, which is still a loser for them politically, and they're going to have to figure that out at some point. Even one of the worst governors in California is recognizing that if he continues to follow that extreme support for that extreme cause, he won't have a chance at running either for president. So you're starting to all of a sudden see some shift and change in some people. But at the end of the day, we've got to designate, like you say, the Muslim Brotherhood and others so that we don't have to go through the courts. We don't have to, the courts are already, you see what a problem they are. I mean, many are captured, how long was it taking to get people processed through the immigration side? So a designation is a much faster way, I think, assuming we have the personnel to begin to take them down. I'm not sure, what else you would recommend that they do, but certainly that is a start. And then other processes, working in law enforcement, we definitely are the eyes and ears in the communities. And we're always saying, keep your eyes open when you see something that is questionable, turn it in or inquire or whatever. So I think you're right. We've got to have more eyes and ears out there, but we've got to educate people as to what that is, because it's so insidious that you may not have any idea that you're living next door to a whole, operation that is completely funded and focused on taking down our country and the people with it.
So, Bill, I just want to comment on that. You are absolutely right. And I often use an analogy. Imagine you go into a 3D movie, but you're not wearing the glasses. And for the first 15 minutes, you're not really getting it. And someone hands you a pair of glasses, and then you actually see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? Those glasses are the training that I've been providing. And the reason I created the training back in 2006, the first training in the government on the things we're talking about, is because good men and women that I knew in local law enforcement, at state investigative agencies, and in other field offices that were diligently doing their duties did not understand that the most dangerous guy in the room when it comes to the Islamic movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, is usually the nicest appearing guy in the room. And he's well dressed and he's well spoken. You go to, I've been to Europe and I've met through a variety of exchanges some of the senior Muslim Brotherhood leaders there, leaders of the Muslim Council of Britain and Muslim Association of Britain, very dangerous organizations that, of course, the British establishment gobbles up and uses for all of their outreach because they are dangerous and suicidal. But that's maybe a discussion for a different day. And these are very effective communicators. They know how to engage people. They know how to manipulate people, and they know how to sway people. They're very, very good at what they do because this is a counterintelligence operation first and foremost. It's a deception operation. That is what they're doing. So when they can befriend 3- and 4-star generals, secretaries of state, going all the way back again to the Clinton era, through the Bush era, through the Obama era, it becomes very incredibly effective from their perspective. But what you just hit on is the key. The reason I've been literally spending almost the last 20 years of my life, I've been doing this for 23 years, but the training that I built, training for police, training for professional intelligence officers, training for military, training for local communities, all these different training, and training people to teach what I teach. I have a 2-week-long training program. I mean, all these things I did because of what you just said. You can literally be a police officer conducting a search warrant in a jihadi's home and have no idea what you're looking at. I'll give a couple examples. Was doing a training in Louisiana for about 75 police officers from about 20 some different jurisdictions. Day 2 of the training, it's a 3-day program. I'm at the front laying some stuff out, and a guy sitting just a few rows back who was a police chief, still is, in a community in Louisiana, turns to 2 guys to his right in the middle of class. And he literally says, "Why in the hell haven't you guys told us this?" 2 guys on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. And they literally, in front of all their colleagues, they say, "We've never heard any of this information." And the whole class first laughs and then gasps. The usual response when I'm finished training, and specifically with law enforcement, and we get federal agents, state investigative agencies, local police, I will ask 2 questions. Raise your hand if you knew this information before you came in here. 100% of the time so far, over the last almost 20 years, 0 hands go up. 0. And I asked the follow-on question, how many of you think this is critical to protecting your community? And 100% of the hands go up. And then they ask questions as, why isn't everyone getting this training? Why isn't this at the police academies, at the officer training, basic officer training in the Army and Marine Corps? And I'll just say, that's a great question. Why don't you ask your bosses? And I'll tell you why it's not. Because as soon as they bring up the training from the outside, the leaders of the Muslim community in that local area will blast the police chief, the sheriff, the mayor. They'll call the state attorney general. They'll threaten lawsuits, and everyone backs away instead of doing the right thing, the courageous thing, and telling these cockroaches to shut their mouths, that they're part, that you understand. We understand you are the bad guys, and we are going to train our people because we have a duty to do so. And until local and state entities do that, we're headed towards defeat in this war.
You hit on it really well. As an active duty officer, we have a lot of trainings that we do, and community based, and all of the different things that we do to take down task forces we're involved in, etc. But the reality is that out of 15 years, I haven't had specific training in identification and the rest of it to address that threat necessarily. We're aware that those threats are out there, but in terms of specific training, we're often dealing with other kinds of scenarios, and that doesn't seem to come to fruition. I do believe, because of the trainings that we do have that are off the grid, that aren't publicized, because we have a lot of those, that we could get the training, and it doesn't have to be a public thing. It means that we've just had the training and we're now more aware, and we have, things to know about. But I think it has to start from the top down. But yeah, 100%. I'm on that same group raising their hand going, no, I didn't get that training. If I wasn't doing this kind of work, I would, I'm aware of it. I have much greater awareness because I get to have amazing guests like yourself, constantly out there banging on the drum and trying to get people to wake up and listen, and I get to learn it. But certainly, it's not something that, I think that we have to have a greater or bigger threat. You would think that 9/11 was a wake-up call. Actually, 9/11 changed all of our communications. When we went back and we looked at, well, why did everything get all messed up? Because everybody was on different frequencies, different codes, and couldn't communicate very well. And there were lots of problems, and that actually shook up the industry. And we have a different way of doing things based on, the 9/11 attack scenario. I'll just put it that way. And that's another story for us to probably get into at some point. But I wanted to play a clip necessarily to show the sensationalization of, what our government does, and then what impact it might have. Melissa, could you play clip 3, please?
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He was the founder and leader of ISIS, the most ruthless and violent terror organization anywhere in the world. The United States has been searching for Baghdadi for many years. Capturing or killing Baghdadi has been the top national security priority of my administration. U.S. Special Operations Forces executed a dangerous and daring nighttime raid in northwestern Syria and accomplished their mission in grand.
So, I think that people go, yeah, great, fantastic, and they jump up and down and say, hey, we got a bad guy, right? And so, that's what that sensationalism is about. But the bigger picture is what?
Well, the bigger picture is, what does that mean to the global Islamic movement? What's the actual impact? They understand that they're jihadis. From their perspective, number one, if they die, from their perspective, the perspective of Islamic law, normative Islamic doctrine, Sharia, is that they automatically go to paradise. So either way, it's awesome. And they're prepared. They have men around these guys ready to step in and continue. Nothing really changes. And again, I want to use the example you used right before the clip and the clip itself. So 9/11, what changed? Baghdadi's dead. What changed? You see the suit-wearing jihadis around the Trump administration, in the Trump administration. They say, yeah, this is great. This one, it goes back to that splinter operation. Yeah, that's great. He's a bad guy. And everyone's like, see, this guy's a good Muslim. Baghdadi's a bad Muslim. And it reinforces that. After 9/11, who did Mr. Bush turn to? He turned to guys like Muzammil Siddiqui, the singular most prominent Muslim Brotherhood leader in North America. Invited him to the White House, had discussions. Who's he? Who was in the Bush White House on 9/11? Suhail Khan, working in the Bush White House. Who's his father? One of the most deceased, but when he was here, one of the most prominent Muslim Brotherhood leaders in North America. Who did Mr. Bush turn to get advice on these matters? Guys like that. And 9/11 simply made that relationship stronger. That's what I was talking about. These and they're not nonviolent. They appear to be nonviolent. I prefer the term pre-violent because they will be violent at some point, but they're not now. They're in leadership positions driving. They know exactly what they're doing. And these relationships they build with people in the government, with pastors, rabbis, senators, governors, police chiefs, and sheriffs, it's all a sham. It's all a lie. It's all a facade to advance the movement. And so that's the lesson. Is it good that we got rid of a jihadi? Sure. We should be killing a lot more of them. But I'd like to see us start in the United States. And in order to do that lawfully under the Constitution, you have to understand you're at war, put the federal government on a war footing, and then actually obliterate the communist and Islamic movements, the jihadis. And by the way, here's a byproduct of when you actually know how to identify them. Because then when there are people who self-identify as Muslim, like grow up in a Muslim household, and by the way, it's a capital crime in Islam to leave Islam. All Sharia mandates the law of apostasy, which is you leave Islam, you have to be killed. So what about the person that grows up in a Muslim family, an Islamic family that wants to leave? How about the women that are treated like property because that's what Islamic law views them as, and they want to get out? So I'm not saying everyone who self-identifies as a Muslim is a part of that movement. The only way you can discern between the two, and by the way, it is very difficult, but the only way you can discern is to actually understand their doctrine, their modus operandi, and how they actually do what they're doing. Because I have worked with, when I was in the government and now outside of the government, I work with Muslims who are legitimately, they don't want a global caliphate. They don't. Now you can make the argument, well, but then isn't that what Islam requires? Yes, it is. But I'm not the Sharia police. I want to destroy these hostile movements who threaten my family, your family, and our constitutional republic. So by understanding the enemy, you actually then can understand where are the Muslims that do not want that. And they're hard to find. And here's why: because they've grown silent, because they see our government, including the current administration, working with them. So they feel like they have nowhere to go. This is the byproduct of when you actually get trained as a local police officer, some state agency, FBI, DHS, whoever else. Then you can actually operate sources with an understanding of how to discern, if you're able, whether these guys are hostile or not. And I'm not saying you don't work. We work with plenty of bad guys, but you got to know they're bad guys. And if you're working with someone who's either less of a bad guy or not a bad guy, you have to know how to discern that. The only way to do that is by actually knowing the enemy.
It's been a great, view into the sort of inner workings and the gut of this caliphate and Islamic movement on the show. It's been really amazing to kind of have you kind of explain the process, because so many people just get little dribs and drabs and they don't really get it into context. And the context is everything. And I really appreciate, John, your view into that. I wanted to segue over to some Q&A before we end the show. If I can get Melissa back on, she's probably got a couple of questions for you. Hello, Melissa.
Hello. Yes, I have a lot of questions written down. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, but I've got some that I really want to get to. So we know that people of all different faiths can, like Christians, Jews, different, Mormons, all the different faiths can take a scripture and make a whole corrupt doctrine from it. Do you think Islam is the case where there's these radicalists who are twisting the original, what they believe is their scripture, to justify these horrible acts of jihad and all these different things? Or do you think the whole religion, the actual original, is also bad and they're just acting out what they believe their faith says?
So that's a great question. I appreciate the opportunity to answer that. So first of all, normative and Islamic doctrine teaches the purpose of Islam is to wage war against the non-Muslim community in order to impose Allah's divine law, Sharia, Islamic law, on every human on earth. That's it. That's the stated purpose of Islam. 100% of all authoritatively published Islamic legal texts, the law itself, the tafsir, and all the things that support the law. The tafsir, by the way, legally defines every verse in the Quran. So, for instance, there is no such thing as twisting a verse in the Quran. If the tafsir says that this verse means X, it's a capital crime for a Muslim to say it means something else. It is a capital crime for a Muslim to teach another Muslim something about Islam that's not true. So when you look at Islamic textbooks used to teach 8, 10, 12-year-old children in Asia, in Europe, and I've looked at dozens and dozens of these and read through them, in the United States, in the Middle East, they all say the exact same thing. So there is no published Islamic law. There is no published textbook used for Muslims to teach other Muslims about Islam. Now, there are books that you can buy at various bookstores and online for non-Muslims to teach you about Islam that say all kinds of things. But that's not Islamic doctrine. And since it is obligatory under Islamic law for Muslims to lie to non-Muslims, there's the answer. What's interesting is that, isn't it interesting how 100% of the jihadis killed or captured on the battlefields of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Africa, elsewhere, on the streets of Europe and the United States, quote Islamic doctrine exactly the same way. So either they're all getting their version of Islam wrong in the exact same way, or they're just quoting normative Islamic law. And I would argue it's the latter.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, you mentioned communism kind of using Islam and stuff like that, but isn't communism anti-religion? And like the religion is the worship of the state or something, or the government? Or is that wrong? Maybe you can explain it if I'm wrong.
That's a great question. I love this question. So first of all, from the Islamic perspective, the Islamic movement can never violate Sharia in anything they do. And evidence of that is the fact that, for instance, on each continent, there are organizations in the United States, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, the Fiqh Council of North America, and others, whose sole purpose, because they're all Islamic legal scholars, is to ensure that the movement does not violate Sharia in anything it does. So you can work, Islam allows them to work with whoever they want to deceive them, to advance their movement, even if it advances a different cause, so long as they never violate Sharia. So they can work with nationalist groups, communist groups, so
Would
long
that
as
be a
they're...
good way to test if someone is a Muslim? Because since they believe it's okay to lie to you, maybe test them, right? I don't know if eating pork would count, but something, I don't know Sharia law. But would that be a good way to test if someone is like very obedient to that movement, is by...
I mean, it makes it very difficult because they're compelled to lie, required under the law to lie. I mean, Islamic law allows military jihadis to, be clean shaven and wear crosses in the Dar al-Harb, in the non-Islamic countries, as a sign. They can be what, that's what I was saying earlier. They can pretend to be conservative, patriotic Republicans. This is how it works. And I think the level of deception is so incredible that most Americans can't fathom it. One thing I want to comment on the question, I disagree with the premise, is we keep using the word religion. And I want to go back to the 7th grade textbook, most widely used book to teach Muslim children in U.S. Islamic schools about Islam. It says in that second paragraph on the first page of the book, Islam is not a religion. That's what they're teaching their children. It is a complete way of life. So what communism and Islam have in common is they are totalitarian systems governed by doctrine that both have published strategies and massive networks in the United States whose sole purpose is to overthrow the constitutional republic. And they're working together, and they are, I would argue, they're on the verge of winning, because we have no idea, as Bill said earlier, we have no idea how to gauge that they're actually winning or losing, because we don't know what we're looking at.
Thank you. And I have one final question, Dr. Bill. I'm sorry, but I got to know this one is what is the ultimate purpose of them wanting to see the downfall of America? Because I know, they see us as like the great evil, or they see us as like a Babylon kind of thing. But ultimately, I guess I don't know what other purpose they would have. Like, what's it? Because they can't wipe out the whole country. So what is the goal? What is the purpose of them seeing the downfall of America?
Well, so the question, what's the purpose? The Islamic movement's purpose is to establish an Islamic state across the United States. The communist movement's purpose is to establish communism. And I think what's
like just to make it a Muslim country.
Yes.
Like what they have in the Middle East.
Yes. And I would argue what they're creating in England and France and the Netherlands and Germany. Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
I've seen the videos that are just sickening. I saw a video of this man slap a 1-year-old in a stroller and yell in Arabic or whatever. And then I went and read the comments, and they said he was a Muslim and he was yelling at them for something they were doing, and slapped her baby really hard, full of blast. And that was in the UK. And then I've seen the knife stabbings, all the different things that are going on there, and they're just downplaying it. And if you search violence in UK right now, what comes up is far-right extremists violence, not Islam violence, which I think is odd.
That's right. That's the narrative. So I'll leave you with this comment. In 2009, I was asked to attend a conference by the guy who built the conference in the UK. That was the host was the Defense Academy in the UK in Shrivingham. And as a part, there's so many parts to this story. I'll just stick to the one that's pertinent to your question. I got a chance, was invited to sit down quietly with some members of parliament, retired 3- and 4-star generals, and people that have titles in the UK that are in the hierarchy in Britain. And I explained to them, they asked me for my assessment, and I said, I think the UK is finished. And that was 2009. And I explained why. But what we are witnessing right now in 2025 is the complete takeover of Britain and the surrendering of Britain by its king and its prime minister and those who are in power. And I see very few voices in Britain, other than those of Tommy Robinson and a few others who, that of course they imprisoned and is in solitary confinement because you have to shut the mouthpieces down. And this is the beacon of the West, Great Britain. Literally the heart of the West is surrendering and turning the UK over to barbarians. And let's be very clear, Islam is a totalitarian system that is led by barbarians. So of course this is their behavior, slitting people's throats and raping women in the street and slapping babies. Slapping babies is the least of it. Raping, having boys that are 6, 7 years old that they use for their sexual gratification. This is what you get. I mean, read the writings of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams on Islam. Read the writings of John Quincy Adams on Islam. Read what Theodore Roosevelt had to say. Read what Sir Winston Churchill had to say. This is not new. This is 1,400 years old. And the difference is now in the West, there don't seem to be many men of courage in positions of authority. Very few. You can literally count them on one hand.
John, that's just amazing insight. I don't think that people recognize, because of the insidious nature of the infiltration, how utterly dangerous it is to have people that have this kind of a theology, but it's not a thought, but a concept of how to function, which isn't a religion, as you say. At its root and at its core, is not equal. It's not something that anyone in our thinking would really tolerate if they truly understood how bad. If you think about what happened in Israel with the attack that they had and the over 1,000 people that were killed, within a day, and how torturous, how aggressive, how terrible all of that was, and yet that's their modus operandi. and the rest of the world, doesn't even understand how bad that was. So this danger is much greater than anybody probably tends to want to think about, and yet they pose as businessmen. They infiltrate all of the levers of power, and we have to figure out how we root them out and stop it. And I think it's been a great conversation to just pull back the veil and just discuss it. So again, John, I appreciate your time today coming onto the show, and maybe we'll get back to this as things unfold in this new administration and kind of see and unpack where we're headed.
Thank you. I appreciate being on here. If people want to get a hold of me, johnguandolo.com is my website. The Into Action training is available for anybody that wants it. That's for communities, and we have the law enforcement training and training first responders, whoever needs it. And again, I'm to the point. I agree with you. A lot of the training we just do it at the local community and continue to help people, because there are actually a number of communities around the country that are taking action very quietly and pushing the bad guys out because they've come to understand it. And that's where I think we're going to win or lose this whole war. But I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with your audience here today and with you. Thank you.
Great, John. Appreciate it.